Youth and their culture are important because they eventually become adults and will be full participants in all aspects of social life.
It is clear that young people from everywhere embody a shifting set of styles, tastes, vocabularies, and values that are distinct from those of their elders.
Youth occupy an interesting position in the life cycle. They are not children, and they are not fully developed adults. Their personalities and characters are still malleable. They can further develop in one direction or another.
The 50s were a time that opened up the world to be integrated for whites and blacks. Rock and roll brought with it a culture of rebellion. Parents were worried that it was too provocative and would corrupt their kids. Teens were exposed to sex and drugs, but there were also more serious things like nuclear war drills happening during school time. Young Americans had more disposable income and enjoyed greater material comfort than their forefathers, which allowed them to devote more time and money to leisure activities. Music made by Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Buddy Holly, and Jerry Lee Lewis were at the top of the charts. While youth had found an outlet for their feelings and concerns, their parents were much less enthused about rock and roll and the rebellion and sexuality it seemed to promote. Many regarded the music as a threat to American values. Despite adults' dislike of the genre, or perhaps because of it, more than 68% of the music played on the radio in 1956 was rock and roll. Famous movies like Sunset Boulevard, Walt Disney's Sleeping Beauty, and Rebel Without a Cause came out. To appeal to teens, studios produced large number of horror films and movies starring music idols such as Elvis. Popular books that came out were Catcher in the Rye, Fahrenheit 451, Charlotte's Web, Lord of the Flies, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Popular slang used by teenagers were bash, which means a great party, give me a bell, which means call me on the telephone, and word from the bird, which means the person speaking was saying the truth. There were many fads in the 1950s, but the biggest ones were Mickey Mouse, hula hoops, and poodle skirts. Overall, the 50s were the start to youth culture, as many young people were starting to get noticed more as an individual other than just some kids. The 60s were the era of sex, drugs, and pop revolution, but also of anti-war protests and inner-city riots. And the more the young pushed forward, the more the adults pushed back. Youth culture began to rise and was thrust into the mainstream America because of what was occurring in a widespread rebellion against the mass society occurring in young college students. It was a rebellion against the 1960s politics of the United States, the Vietnam War, and the culture of the older generation in general. Songs like Sweet Caroline, Can't Help Falling in Love, and Brown Eyed Girl were playing everywhere. Popular movies like The Sound of Music, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Easy Rider came out and had people going to the movies often. Popular books that came out were To Kill a Mockingbird, The Outsiders, and A Wrinkle in Time, which had the young bookworms reading all the time. Popular slang used by teenagers were Beat It, which means to leave quickly, Flower Child, which basically means a hippie, and PDA, which means public display of affection, were used. Fads include lava lamps, surfing, and tie-dye, which makes total sense because most teens at this time were flower children. Overall, the 60s were a time when peace was appreciated and many believed they were in the golden age. In the summer of 1969, for example, more than 400,000 young people trooped to the Woodstock Music Festival in upstate New York, a harmless 3 days that seemed to represent the best of the peace and love generation. The era's legacy remains and brought a sense of empowerment to America during this time.
The 70s began, of course, in the wake of the 60s and have remained ever since in their shadow. Many get the youth culture of these decades confused because they were very similar. While youthful drug use and sexual experimentation had been the cause for hysteria among adults for at least 50 years, these practices became much more widespread during this period. Drug use was associated by rock music and visual culture, with both of their consumption by youth and their production by popular musicians and artists. The most popular songs of the 70s were Wonderful Tonight, YMCA, Sweet Home Alabama, and We Are Family, as they were played everywhere you went. Infamous movies like The Godfather, Westworld, and Grease represented what the public wanted to see in the 70s: drama, thrills, and romance. Books like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Watership Down, and The Stand stood out from the crowd during the 70s and have continued to become what we know of them today. Popular slang in the 70s was psych, which was a word used when tricking someone. Far out was used to describe something that was amazing, cool, and unbelievable, and dream on was used when telling someone that they were thinking unrealistically. Some of the most popular fads were Daisy Dukes, Dashboard Hula Girls, and disco, all of which made sense due to the most popular music being disco themed. In all, the 70s was a time of disco, economic struggle, and cultural change, all of which is represented in one way or another in the society. The 70s remain an era in which many people would like to revisit, not only for the memories, but for the joy of living in the period itself. The 80s, a time which was like no other. It was a time when pop culture really became its own, as movies, music, and TV shows all showed youth doing typical teenage activities. The Breakfast Club, Kids at Detention, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, kids skipping school, kids celebrating a birthday with 16 wishes. Films at the time didn't show war or anything with the world. It showed youth acting just as they normally did, like the youth. The way the youth acted was reflected in music, as the musical works of John Hughes, Steven Spielberg, and musical titans such as Michael Jackson and Madonna became extremely popular, with all of them addressing sensitive subjects in one way or another. Popular movies in the 80s included Scarface, The Goonies, and Full Metal Jacket, most of which are still popular to this day. Books like The Handmaid's Tale, Ender's Game, and The Color Purple represent what the youth learned in their books throughout the decade. Slang in the 80s included the word bad, which describes something as cool, but to a much higher degree. Bag your face was used to describe someone as hideous, and barf me out was used in reaction to a particularly offensive comment or piece of news. Fads in the 80s were breakdancing, big hair, and Converse, all of which were popular with the Valley Girls of the generation. All in all, the 80s was a period of change for American society, as the youth was taking more liberties with every decade, not excluding this one. The 80s was a wonderful time to live in, and still would be today, as the times are finally easing and the Cold War's coming to a close at the end of the decade.
As we enter the 1990s, a generation is appearing on the horizon, and the whole world is taking notice. Life in the 1990s has become stressful to young people. As the percentage of the teenage population decreases relative to the adult world, the number of teenage pregnancies continue to rise. There are a growing number of minorities living at a poverty level, and there are a growing number of single-parent households. Popular songs were The Electric Slide, Baby Got Back, Macarena, and The Ice Ice Baby. The most popular movies in the 90s was Lost in Space, Titanic, and Shawshank Redemption, most of which are still known around the nation. Books in the 90s were themed around fantasy, as the top 5 most popular including Harry Potter and Games of Thrones, both of which are re-owned books. Slang in the 90s was very relaxed, with the teens using dip or let's dip, both of which meant to leave. Ike became popular to stand for all right or okay, and as if, which was used to replace for yeah right. Fad in the 90s used Beanie Babies, Billy Chair, and boy bands, which the final one bleeding into the 2000s. In conclusion, the 90s was a period in which the teenagers further developed their lives and chose what they were or weren't going to do. This was all implemented on their pop culture in some fashion, with it being more prevalent in some aspects rather than others.
In the 2000s, the teen years started to be highly regimented. Teen schedules were packed with activities, sports, and clubs, focusing on what would look good for college applications. Songs like Just Dance, Yeah, Low, and TikTok still please the generation today and then. Movies like Mean Girls, Spider-Man, and The Notebook came out and are classic 2000 movies today. Popular books that came out during this time were The Help, Twilight, and The Hunger Games, which are still read and loved by many today. Short-lived slang from this time was faux shizzle, crunked, and cray cray, which I'm sure we know it all what they mean. Fads in the 2000s were Bratz dolls, autotune, Crocs, and being emo. Today, all the teenagers and young adults we have grew up during this period. It's very special to them, and it gave them a great decade to grow up during. In present day, the most popular way to dress is by bringing back the old styles, such as wearing old rock band t-shirts, ripped jeans, denim skirts. These old school outfit choices can be considered fashionable. Over the past decade, the styles have become more and more grungy and laid back. The movies, compared to the way they used to be, are filled with more excited plot twists that are never expected. The new technology used to create the films are very modern and make the effects sound lifelike. Music is more exciting and not as many instruments is used during the songs. Authors are choosing to write about mysteries and fantasies that no one could think about having. In order to understand the slang terms used, you have to be on social media, such as being salty or calling someone the goat, Bottle flipping memes, posting everything on Snapchat stories have become very popular things lately. The present is still evolving while more people create different trends and will continue to change for years to come. We can thank youth culture for this.